Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 70 of the Meet the Parents podcast and your weekly serving of parenting chat. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and tonight I'm joined by Simon from Man vs Pink and John from Dadblog UK. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So, this week we're going to talk about what we would say to our kids if we had to write them a letter from beyond the grave. Oh yes, it's a top comedy edition, this one. Regular readers of my blog will know that I'm not big on doing sponsored posts, and it's very much a personal thing. I'm in no way against bloggers doing paid work or endorsing brands, and I've done a few in my time as well, but as a rule, I find the idea of forcing myself to concoct 500 words about a brand or product I wouldn't normally write about, and may have little to no enthusiasm for, to be anathema to me. But then I've always been a bit of a stubborn idealist at heart. However, every now and then, a campaign comes along that makes me sit up and think, hey, that's actually a pretty good way of leveraging bloggers to produce some relevant and interesting content. And so it was with a recent, or current, Compare the Market campaign called Letters of Life, which asked parents to write a letter to their children as if they just died. And what a fantastic concept, and a great way to gently encourage parents to consider the value of a product as prosaic and morbid as life insurance. Other companies are available. As it happens, 2 of the 6 bloggers who contributed letters were Simon and John, who just happened to be joining me tonight. So, Simon, let's start with you. So, what were your first thoughts when you were approached with the idea of writing a letter to your daughter from beyond the grave?
I think I first thought that it's a really good writing challenge. I quite like it when you get set tasks that have these limits, and then you're it's almost like a problem solving thing. Like, how can I then create this piece of writing fulfilling these criteria? I just thought straight away that it's a great way. You're talking about sponsored content. In terms of sponsored content, it's something that I could do very easily and do it within my kind of blogging theme. Some of us found it easier than others, and some found it harder than others. And I found it really easy because once I picked the idea of what I was going to write about, it was just it's kind of an interesting thing to write. And I didn't focus on the morbidity of it, the fact that I'm writing, I've died and I'm writing my daughter a letter about how to live, or however you want to phrase it. I just saw it as a writing prompt. And one that was quite exciting and good, for sponsored content. Like you're saying, sometimes on the worst kind, you're trying to write about a product or a service that you're not necessarily well versed in, or don't use particularly, or whatever. This was something completely different, which was great.
Yeah, and I think as bloggers, that's exactly the kind of challenge that we enjoy, isn't it? You're being asked to do something a little bit different, and actually going through the process of deciding how you're going to do that. It often brings out the best in us, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's I don't know, you sort of look through old blog posts, and sometimes some really nice ones have been sponsored posts that have come up as a writing prompt, based around, one idea or another idea, or the theme is around something that happened in the past or something. And I don't know, for me, I find it really great to get a prompt to work from.
Having read your letter, much of it, like your blog, is based around breaking with gender stereotypes and wanting your daughter not to grow up restricted by them. So just talk us through some of the key messages that you wanted to impart to her.
Well, the basic message was for her never to think that she can't do something because she's a girl, or can't like something, or or can't enjoy something, or be with someone, whatever. That being a girl shouldn't be a barrier or a limit to anything. That's essentially the message.
Yeah, and I guess all 3 of us having daughters, that's something that it certainly really resonated with me. I don't know about you, John, whether that kind of message really resonates with you too.
Yes, it certainly does, and it came through strongly in Simon's letter. I mean, there's no doubting at all. Of course, I am the main carer for my kids, and so interesting, especially my oldest daughter. She actually quite often speaks out when I come across occasions when I face discrimination of some sort or another, and yet because of course she's a daughter, I'm sort of treading this rather fine line, because I have to kind of speak to, and of course Izzy, a younger sister, and sort of prepare them for the fact that, well, actually your girls are going to be women, you're going to face discrimination as well, and sort of have to talk them through that, but at the same time making clear to them that they can do whatever they want and they should never feel limited by their gender.
So Simon, is there anything else that you would have liked to have added to the letter?
Well, the only thing that occurred to me after I'd done it was the basic theme was you don't ever think you can't do anything or be anything because you're a girl. But also, conversely, like, don't ever think you should do something or you should be something because you're a girl. I think it's kind of implicit in the messaging anyway, but it's still worth pointing out that there's still a sense that girls should do this, women should do this or do that, and it's equally as as strong a message to get across that being a girl, being a woman doesn't mean you should do something, as well as it shouldn't be a barrier.
It's having that openness, as you say, to consider any option and not to feel that you're being forced down any particular path. So, and if you flip that on its head, do you think you would have written the letter any differently if you'd been writing to a son rather than a daughter?
I've absolutely no idea. I mean, I had no idea I'd be sort of having these kind of feelings as the father of a daughter until I had a daughter. This is not territory, and I'd ever considered before in terms of fatherhood and having a daughter and all those issues. That's that letter only exists because of my experience as a father of a daughter. It's not something that I could have possibly written before. So in short, no, I have no idea. I mean, and to be fair, you're best placed to answer that out of all of us, because you've got some, you have both.
Yeah, and we'll come on to my thoughts on that in a bit. So, not that we're wishing anything to happen to you, of course, but if you were to die in the not too distant future, is there anything in particular that you think you would most regret missing out on, assuming you can actually have regrets when you're dead?
Just the obvious, really. Just missing her growing up further, whatever age it would happen to be that I pass away. That would be the regret, just seeing what happens next. Yeah, and if it happened now, it'd be like that regret of just not knowing what kind of tween she becomes, let alone teen and young woman, and she, all of that. That would be a sad thing. Just to, you kind of do all these things in childhood, hoping that it has an effect in later life and helps with aspects of their life later on. And I guess that would be the regret, not seeing if that worked out or not, basically.
Yeah, and I guess in the same way you talk about the kind of feelings you've had since becoming a father, that you never really knew what that was going to be like or what it would have felt like until you actually felt it. I guess it can be quite difficult to try and picture what it is, all the things that you might have missed out on other than the obvious things, because so much of our experiences as parents is in the small details, isn't it, rather than the big milestones.
And it's quite funny. I mean, when my wife was pregnant, and before we knew what the sex of the baby was, we were both assumed, we both thought we were having a boy, and it wasn't like we wanted to. It was just, that's just, I don't know, you have all these myths growing up, about how you feel, knowing things, and we had an intuition that we were having a boy, and it's weird that we both felt it. We were both shocked when we found out we were having a girl. Like, I think you have a sense of want to know what's going on, just with the first child. That's what, it's all we've had. We were just so convinced we were having a boy, and it was interesting to, I don't know, change that, and a lot of my assumptions and presumptions about what that would mean. It's been wonderful to undermine them myself, which has been great.
So John, let's move on to you. You've got 2 daughters already, so what were your first thoughts when you were asked to write this letter?
It was interesting, actually, because there was a sort of flurry of messages about this campaign that was sort of sent my way, and I sort of ignored them, sort of half read them at first. And when I eventually sat down and read it, I don't mind admitting, I was utterly horrified to begin with. I just thought sort of having to imagine my own death and write about it for my children did leave me somewhat stumped at first. But with the campaign notes and briefing notes, there was an example of a letter written by Caitlin Moran. She sort of kicked this whole thing off, actually. The letter she wrote mentioned to her daughter, there was a fantastic line, it's sort of almost sort of poetic, where she describes how her daughter must continue buying vintage dresses on eBay because she can just imagine her dancing in them, as she always has done. Lines like that sort of stuck with me, and then I thought, there's a chance to actually put a bit of humour into this. And then when I started writing, frankly, I just couldn't stop. I had to stop myself. I could have made that letter 4 or 5 times as long as it was in the end.
As you were writing the letter, were there any particular favourite memories that came to mind of your experience with the girls to date?
Oh gosh, there have been so many. I mean, it's going to sound a bit sort of hackneyed and cliched, but clearly remember that the 2 of them being born, the days that 2 of them being settled into nursery, and then both of them starting school. And of course, Izzy's only just started school, so that's a very fresh memory. But the birthday parties, the play dates they've had, also simple stuff. Putting Helen on the bed once, and then just taking apart a newspaper and just laying it all across the bed and just letting her crawl all over it and rip it to pieces. And silly little things like that all sort of came to mind. They didn't make it into the letter. But a huge number of memories. I mean, so it was sort of like the point you were making a minute ago, Tim. A lot of parenting, it all comes from the small moments. It's not necessarily the milestones.
Yeah. You talked in your letter, albeit with tongue slightly inserted in cheek, about things like the importance of table manners and what happens when someone takes a side plate from the wrong side on the circular table, which immediately reminded me of that scene from Pretty Woman where the hotel manager is teaching Julia Roberts' character about which fork goes with which course. But what other values and behaviours do you hope that they've inherited from you? Oh, and your wife.
Right, the mention of table manners may have been tongue-in-cheek, but my kids had better have good table manners, honestly. It's an occasional bone of contention between my wife and I, how much importance I put on it. I think actually the crucial one that I did actually put in the letter is always to do your bit to sort of help those less fortunate than yourself, to try never to judge their situations. Easy said than done, but if I look back at my own life, I can certainly think of mistakes I've made and things I've done, judgment that I may or may not have faced at the time, which maybe wasn't very helpful from others. And I just hope that my kids can always try and see the best in people, the best in situations, and crucially also, if there's one thing I struggle with, it's people who have a half empty approach to life. I think you should always look at the world and any opportunity that you're given and see it as an opportunity, not as a challenge, is what I would say. You've got to try and see the best in everything.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to approach the world. Now, in your case, and also in Simon's case, you maybe have a slightly different perspective on things to other dads in the same situation because you are the main carer in the family. I mean, can you imagine that the letter might have been any different if you'd been writing it from the perspective of, say, a full-time working dad? Or do you think actually much of it would have been fundamentally the same?
Oh, gosh, there's 2 ways to answer that. I think ultimately, and I don't know if Simon would agree with this, but if you are the main carer for your kids, you do see you are so much more involved with your children that I imagine actually that, yes, the letter probably would be very different to how a full-time working dad would write it. And I'm not saying that a full-time working dad would do a less emotional letter. Far from it. I'm sure they'd be as emotional, as caring, and as concerned. But just I think the things you would concentrate on and express maybe slightly would be different if you didn't have the experiences of spending so much time with your children. Oh gosh, Tim, you've caught me off guard with that question.
Sorry.
It's a really good question, actually. But no, I think it would be different. But as I say, no less emotional or heartfelt, I don't think.
Simon, from your perspective, you've gone from having been the primary carer for the best part of 5 years to now a situation where both you and your wife are working full time. So do you think your perspective would have changed had you been working for all that time as well? Or, working full time for all that time?
So I'd like to say I hope not, basically. I mean, my letter is less about personal observations and that kind of intimacy than a more thematic approach and an ideal. And I don't think that would have changed. And another aspect of it, though, that actually is relevant to being, until relatively recently, an at-home dad, is I've been reflecting on the idea that if I want our daughter to be, a confident, empowered woman, I can't show that per example through me. I can't be that and she be inspired by that. That's one of the reasons why I think I kind of seek out these so much stress on stories and media and positive role models in terms of female characters, because I can't do that. That's one thing I can't do. My wife, her mother can do that, but I can't. I can show her, I hope, how to be a good human being and that kind of thing. But in terms of gender roles, that's really my main sort of weapon in the arsenal to do that. And being at home with her, I've had the opportunity to do that quite a lot. And I would have had much less opportunity to do that if I hadn't have been. So that would have changed the tone of the letter, I think, potentially.
And I guess you being at home has also enabled your wife to go out and be, that kind of positive role model in terms of going out and working and having a career and showing your daughter that it doesn't necessarily need to be the traditional roles of the man being the breadwinner and the woman being at home, that it's perfectly acceptable and normal in your case for those roles to have been reversed.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's not, she's a 5-year-old now. She doesn't, the idea of tradition doesn't exist. So in her idea that's what our family does and has done up until recently. And, me going back to work has been a big deal. And she's noted it before. She's not asked me, why does mummy go to work and you are at home? She just kind of points out, oh yeah, most families that we know, either the mum and dad work or the mum stays at home. In our family, we do it differently. And it's been more of an observation. It hasn't been something that she's been asking, why? Why is this? Why are we different? Yeah, you're right. It's just kind of, just by that example, then my wife is presenting a great role model to it.
So, John, finally, are there any other particular anecdotes that you would want your daughters to remember you by, were you to pass away tomorrow? Well, maybe not tomorrow specifically.
Yeah. I'm catching a plane tomorrow, Tim. Thanks for that. I think I would want Izzy to remember all the horsey rides I gave her. I'd maybe not want her to remember just how bad my back was afterwards, because she regularly screws my back up by jumping on my back and demanding I tear up the living room with her on my back. Helen, one springs to mind. We as a family, Helen, my wife, and I, we entered a fun run earlier this year, 5K fun run. My wife, who isn't a particularly experienced runner, I hang back with Jill while we did this fun run. Helen, at age, she was 7 at the time, crossed the finish line 10 minutes ahead of her mother. It's just been a running joke in the family ever since, but I just hope that she remembers that. I don't know what lesson in life there is for her to remember that, other than it's just funny that she crossed the line ahead of her mother.
And sometimes the most important and memorable things in life don't have to have any meaning, do they? They don't have to be deep and meaningful. And I noticed you got in your pun about it being a running joke as well.
Ah, very good. Yes. I'm going to pretend I'll notice that as well.
So Simon and John had the advantage of writing letters, and as Simon said, it's a really interesting exercise to approach as a blogger or a writer, or even just generally as a parent, to think about the kind of things that you would want to say. So, although I haven't written a letter, I'm now going to turn the questions over to Simon to see what my thoughts on the matter are.
Well, Tim, so what would you want to say about how you feel about each of your kids?
Now, see, I have multiple. I have 3 kids, and as we were saying earlier, I have both the 2 boys and the girl. So it is a little bit different, I think, for each of them. I think I'd want them to know how I I really do think the world of each of them, in spite of all the times they regularly drive me up the wall, because they are each amazing and unique in their own way, and I have no doubts they have the potential to be, you know, anything they want to be if they set their mind to it. So I'll just pass you the sick bags at this point, but Cara always will have a special place in my heart. She is very much Daddy's little princess, and I hope she realises how much it means to me when I wake up in the morning to find her, you know, snuggled up between us, and you know, those special mornings when I wake up to find her sleeping in my arms. Now, I thought with the two boys I was pretty fulfilled as a parent, but I am genuinely so glad that we had a third, and so happy it was a girl. It really has worked out for us, and it really opened up a whole new side of parenting that I think I would otherwise never have experienced, and I have her to thank for that. And it's not that we would have been unhappy or unfulfilled if we'd stopped at two boys. Of course we wouldn't, but I guess maybe sometimes there's an element of you don't know what you've missed until suddenly you have it. So yeah, having had a girl after two boys, my feelings are completely different. With the boys, I really feel for Isaac at the moment. He's nearly 10. He's been struggling to cope with hormones. And in truth, we've been struggling as well. He's still the same good-natured kid that he's always been. But let's just say it's a little bit of a battle for him and us at the moment. So I think I'd want him to know that in spite of how hard we come down on him sometimes, he still makes me really proud of everything he's done. And I think sometimes he worries we don't love him as much as we used to because, you know, we're having to tell him off more. But that just isn't the case. So that just leaves Toby, and he's always struggled, not just with being the middle child, but also because he's the quiet one between two siblings who never stop talking or demanding attention, and yet he has always been the child that I get the most, because he's basically a mini-me, both in terms of how he looks and how he thinks, and I worry that he feels he's overshadowed and forgotten, but he's anything but. You know, in many ways, I think actually he's the smartest of our three. He's certainly the most creative, but he's also the laziest when he doesn't really want to do something, and that's very much me. But most of all, I think I'd want them to know that, and you know, this is the point at which I need to sound the cliche klaxon. You know, they have all changed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined before becoming a father. So, you know, as much as they infuriate me sometimes, they delight and surprise me far more often. So my feelings for the kids are just, they're almost too complex to put into words. But like you were saying, Simon, I've experienced a whole load of feelings since becoming a father that I didn't really know what had hit me until it happened.
Well, now, given that you've passed away, and this is all very sad, are there any favourite memories or anecdotes you would want them to remember you by? And I'm wondering if it's individually or as a trio.
Many of my best memories of the kids, I think, or at least the ones that spring to mind most readily, are ones of them as a trio rather than necessarily individual ones. I don't know if there's anything specific really. And I don't really mind what they remember or how they remember me, as long as they have positive memories to hold on to, because I'm quite a quiet and fundamentally quite conservative kind of guy. I'm quite serious. I'm not one of life's big risk takers. So I'd like them maybe to remember the less serious side of me. So to remember the dad who dances around our living room with them when Strictly's on, the dad who sings with them in the car, the dad who high-fives them whenever they come back with a good report from school, or when they've just earned their latest gymnastics badge or something. And I don't think I'm ever going to be the kind of dad who they see as exciting or inspirational in a kind of a sort of rah-rah kind of way. But if they remember me as a good, happy dad, one who wanted more than anything for them to grow up to become good, happy people, I'll take that as a win.
Oh,
I would too, Tim.
But in terms of yourself as well, so as you were saying before, like if we could have regrets, not that we can have regrets because we passed away, if you could take one memory with you to the grave, what would that be?
Just one memory. That is, it's really hard, isn't it? Yeah. You want it to be like Desert Island Discs, don't you, where you can take a whole selection of them and the Bible with you. I guess the first thing that's popped into my head is, maybe because it's quite a recent memory, is a little moment that we had from our summer holiday this year. We were in Stuttgart. We just been to the Mercedes-Benz Museum, and we were waiting at the station to get a train back into the city centre. The kids had had a really good morning. They were happy and smiling, and there was a moment where they were just kind of horsing around together. All of them had beaming smiles, and Isaac was in the middle and had an arm around each of his siblings, and it was just like one of those Kodak moments. How you always dreamed that life with kids would be in your mind's eye, and in reality it so rarely is. But it was just 3 kids having the time of their lives and enjoying being with each other. And I did actually catch that moment in a photo, and it's now the wallpaper image on my phone. And I can look at that picture and think, yeah, actually, we must have done something right, even if it was just in that one moment. So, it's one of those fleeting moments that you live for, I guess. So yeah, that's the memory I would want to take with me.
And what do you think you'd miss most seeing if you were to die in the near future?
I guess it's easy to say all the obvious stuff, isn't it? Like graduations and weddings and grandchildren. But as we were saying earlier, I think I'd miss just being a part of their everyday lives, all the small stuff. That for me is the joy of parenting. And I think in many ways it's one of the reasons I'm still so involved and passionate about blogging, because it helps me to capture the minutiae of family life that otherwise you'd really easily forget. And I think it's in those little moments where we really shape our children's attitudes and future direction. I mean, yes, I know that sometimes there might be some big pivotal turning point which steers them along a certain path, but growing up and parenting are, for me, as much about the little course corrections you make along the way, as well as the big stuff. And I would really miss being there to be that guiding hand to help them along the way, and then to see what the results are at the end of it, because sometimes you don't see those results for months or for years afterwards, and I would really miss that.
And finally, in your absence, what advice would you give the kids to help them in their futures?
I think I'd tell Isaac not to be so hard on himself. I mean, he's a real perfectionist, and I think he needs to understand that it's okay when he inevitably falls short of either ours or his own standards, and maybe he shouldn't beat himself up and chastise himself as much as he does. He needs to remember that to take the time to focus on the 9 things that are good and not the one thing that's bad. I think for Toby, I would definitely ask him to push himself out of his comfort zone more than he does. He's the most creative of our 3, but too often he finds the first excuse to back away from something new and retreat back into the safety of the familiar. So I think I'd tell him not to be afraid to fail, and to chase new forms of success beyond what he already knows and is good at. And then I think for Cara, a bit like you, Simon, I'd encourage her to find what she truly wants and not feel the pressure to conform to any kind of expectation or stereotype. And she's got a really lovely balance at the moment between being a girly girl at times, and at other times when she's a complete tomboy and she's scarily strong-willed and just a relentless pile driver of energy. I mean, she's so fearless at the moment, and I love that about her, and I hope it's not something that she loses as she gets older. And I think, one general piece of advice for all 3 of them to finish with, I told them not to wait around and take anything about their future for granted. Time flies. We never know quite how much we have left of it. Obviously, I've just died. I can be a terrible procrastinator at times, and I wouldn't want the kids to fall into that same trap. That's me, I guess.
Thank you very much.
That would have made for a much longer letter than either of you 2 wrote.
To be fair, you got more children, so
I think you should write it, Tim.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting exercise, even just thinking about it and actually articulating it out loud, because it's very easy to not really think about stuff like that and just push it to the back of your mind. Then before you know it, it's too late. So anyway, that was a different way of looking at our parenting experiences and aspirations. So I hope you found our thoughts insightful, and if you're up for a challenge, then, as John suggests, why not try writing your own letter to your kids in a similar vein? So before we go, what have we all been up to recently? Simon?
Just continuing with my non-stay-at-home dadness, so to being a working man, and I'm still surprising myself how much I'm enjoying being a commuter. just be able to read after 5 years of being at home with the child, and then actually be able to read books is amazing.
How about you, John?
Well, I keep bumping into you, Tim.
It was only twice in 2 weeks.
But twice in 2 weeks, and then bumping into each other electronically today, I guess. Yeah. What have I been doing? Well, of course, Izzy has started school, so that's my youngest daughter at the school. So I haven't quite taken the leap that Simon has. I haven't taken a job. I'm just basically piled a lot more time into blogging and freelance writing. But of course, I've been settling Izzy into school, which thankfully has gone very well. She's loving it. So that's been the big change at home recently, Izzy starting school.
I mean, as for me, it's been a pretty quiet week or so. For the first time in a while, we got to spend the whole weekend together as a family, which was nice. Isaac and Cara both tried out ballroom and Latin dancing classes at the weekend and both loved it. Toby was encouraged to try it, but decided it was too far outside his comfort zone and didn't. Cara has the benefit of being a decent gymnast already, so she's got the strength and the poise, but Isaac actually is a bit of a star. Within an hour, he'd got his head around, waltz, quick step, cha-cha-cha, jive and samba. Now, he's never been particularly sporty, but he really seems to be into this, so we'll be signing him and Carver up for more. So all those Saturday nights watching Strictly is finally paying off.
I saw your photos. He looked very confident and like he belonged on that. So
he was surprisingly natural. He's always enjoyed dancing around on a Saturday night in our living room. So, but it was really pleased to see him get so enthusiastic about it, and he hasn't stopped talking about it since. So
brilliant.
Yeah, who knows where he'll go with it. And that's it for this episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the three of us online.
I blog as Man vs Pink, Man vs Pink. So it's manvspink.com, and Man vs Pink on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Yeah, pretty easy for me. Website, dadbloguk.com, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, dadbloguk. YouTube, I will just mention that I've recently changed my YouTube channel name. So if you're looking for me on YouTube, I am now youtube.com, John Adams DBUK.
And I'm at Thatcham Dad, and my blog is slouchingtowardsthatcham.com. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and Android devices from our website at meettheparentspodcast.com and via a variety of podcasting apps. You can also follow us on Twitter at Parents Podcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So thanks for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.